Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. What started as all things related to brain health and wellness has morphed into largely brain injury health and wellness, with occasional other neurological topics. My mission remains the same, to help you on the path to a healthier brain. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Scott Powell. Scott has served as Executive Director of the Alabama Head Injury Foundation for nearly 12 years. He has a sincere passion for this population and is committed to building programs and services to help each survivor reach their fullest potential. Thank you so much for being here today, Scott.
Thank you for having me, Mandy. I appreciate it.
Of course. So as I was telling you, my first question is always just to kind of get a little backstory on my guests. What got you into doing this work at the Alabama Head Injury Foundation?
I'll openly admit that if I went back in the archives of like elementary school papers that I saved of what you want to be when you grow up, that executive director of a statewide nonprofit working with people with traumatic brain injuries and traumatic spinal cord injuries was probably not what I wrote. But aging myself a tiny bit, going back to the Rogaine commercials in the 1980s, where the person would always say, I'm not just the president, I'm also a client. I've had a traumatic brain injury in my own past, an ATV accident where I lost consciousness. And at that point in time, really didn't even know to refer to it as a traumatic brain injury. I was young. And at that point in time, as long as you could answer a few questions and, quote unquote, walk it off, you were good to go. And thankfully, I don't believe it has had a lot of lasting ramifications. But as it turns out, I was very happy doing what I was doing before this and saw the opening and just saw the potential to come in and help with an organization. And sort of in a weird sort of situation, the executive director before me had actually developed frontal lobe dementia and had to medically retire from the organization. So in that irony, I came into the organization and have been here ever since and hope that I retire from this organization when I'm done working.
That's awesome. Bad that you had the experience yourself, but a great way to kind of get into that. And I find that I think when we have that passion, that experience ourselves, it makes us a little better at what we do. It gives us insight that the general population that hasn't had a brain injury doesn't necessarily have.
It's a careful dance because, the one thing you always want to avoid is to never assume that you know what someone else is walking through.
Yeah.
We always say, and I'm sure you've heard this, that if you know one person that's had a traumatic brain injury, you know one person that's had a traumatic brain injury. And that's so true. And so I never use my story as an attempt to story top or to say, I know what you're going through. But I do think there's an internal empathy that comes along where when you hear people describing things, it allows you to put yourselves in their place a little bit easier and kind of understand how maybe you can help meet them where they are.
Yeah. There are similarities across the board with concussions and head injuries, but absolutely no two head injuries are exactly the same. Even if two people are sitting in the same vehicle, getting the same motor vehicle accident, they don't have the same injuries. So that's a very important piece to remember, is that everybody is individual. So as you're developing programs and things for your organization, how are you able to kind of bring some of that individualness into those programs?
I think a lot of it is giving our staff the flexibility to kind of curb and sort of manipulate things with their hands to make it personal to each person. So we really try to set, you have to have procedures, you have to have protocols, you have to have eligibility, but you also have to have compassion, you have to have common sense, and you have to be able to bend. And so I think a lot of what we do is just allow ourselves to morph and change quickly, which is one of the advantages of being a small nonprofit, is that you can really cater yourself to each individual situation. Ask yourself if the rules, if it requires that sort of rigidity, or if you can actually adjust it a little bit to say, in this particular case, this uniqueness means what we're doing now may not be ideal. How can we adjust it slightly to make sure that every person that we're trying to serve has the same level of inclusivity?
So that said, what kind of services does your program offer?
I'll be the first to admit that when I first got here, it wasn't an awful lot. It was like a lot of social service agencies that are doing good work tend to do, which is sort of serving as that sort of almost like community connective tissue where you meet someone and you ask them questions and sort of assess what their needs are. And then you identify, well, what's in the community that's currently doing that. And you bring the two of them together like a giant extension cord. And then you say, okay, we've done all we could do in this situation. What we found certainly in our state, was the fact that there were probably fewer things out there to connect people to than what there needed to be. And instead of sitting back and saying, I'm sorry, we don't have anything like that, I think our organization has always been very proactive in trying to think outside the box and say, well, how can we meet people where they are? So, one example of that would be back in 2017. We realized that a lot of the clients that were coming to us when we were talking with them described the anxiety, the stress, the depression, the mental health issues that so often accompany coming to grips with your new normal and living with a traumatic brain injury. And we realized that if we weren't doing anything to help that, it was going to be very difficult to make progress in terms of other aspects of what recovery or even adjusting to a new normal would even look like. So we started a mental health counseling program, not really knowing where it was going to go, what it would be. And then over the course of the last 6 to 7 years, we now have 3 full-time mental health counselors. We have 3 other staff that have a smaller mental health counseling load. We have mental health counseling interns that come in and now have an active caseload of about 82 people that are receiving ongoing, unending free mental health counseling from our organization, which is a tremendous thing to be able to offer to our community. It doesn't have to be in person. About 90% of it is being done virtually. About 10% is in person. So it doesn't matter where you live in the state. If you're in the most rural area, the most urban area, you have the same access to the service as anyone else. And that was a situation where we didn't ever set out to say we'd love to have a counseling program. It morphed and developed because we listened to what our clients talked about.
Yeah.
Kind of related to that, about 2 years before that, we did a needs assessment within our population, and one of the recurring things that came out of that, and it was a result of data that we'd actually tried to mine and figure out as well using that cognitive assessment tool with our clients, was that a lot of our clients seemed to be stagnating about 3 years post-injury, and in some cases even regressing. And when we tried to delve into what was going on, the most common things that came back were a little bit of caregiver complacency, of just not knowing what else to do and just kind of reaching the end of the rope saying, I'm not sure what else to do to challenge my loved one to continue. And then it was a lot of mental anxiety, stress, depression, the part of the survivor of just, I think, all of the realities of the fact that, yes, the medical professional said your road to recovery may be incomplete. Your road to recovery may take longer than what you would like for it to. You hear that, but it doesn't become real until you wake up one day and realize, oh my goodness, it's 2 years since my injury and I'm still not where I want to be. And it's hard to keep motivating yourself to try. So we said, what can we do about this? We had this whole group of our clients that had come to us, and now we're multiple years removed. There were multiple years removed from the time period that most medical professionals said that the greatest level of recovery takes place. We had other individuals that were underinsured and uninsured and only received a minimal amount of outpatient therapy when they went home and knew that there was more they could do if they just had access to it. We knew we weren't going to convince our local insurance providers to all of a sudden open their doors and say, we're going to offer a lot more, inpatient, outpatient rehab to you. So we went to universities and we created a camp called the Bright Ideas TBI camp. We now have 5 of them across the state. We bring together interdisciplinary groups of students under faculty supervision from physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology, audiology, pharmacy, nursing, social work, recreation therapy, music therapy, and they work with our clients over a 3-day period, assessing them, testing interventions, and then giving them a home plan that they can execute over the next 3 to 6 months to actually spearhead a new second level of continued recovery, adapting, adjustment, and the results have been extraordinary. But it was just another thing that just kind of sprang out of the ground because it wasn't something that was part of our 5-year strategic plan. It was more, my goodness, this is something that our clients are saying we need. How can we do this? And it happened.
That is really cool. You just gave me chills with that. That's the idea of utilizing students to help people progress in their recovery. That's ingenious. Yeah. Hats off to you guys. I would never have thought of doing something like that. So how long have you been doing that for with all those different sites?
We started it in 2018 at our first
Okay.
university, and then after the first year, the fun part was that it marketed itself because every university, from accreditation standpoint, was required to do some degree of interdisciplinary education, and they were all looking for opportunities. So when they got together for their statewide PT conference or their statewide OT conference, they're talking to their faculty partners, and one said, "Hey, we're doing this thing with the Head Injury Foundation." So the next year, 2 other universities reached out and said, "Hey, we heard what you're doing with Stanford University. How can we get involved and do that too?" Then after that, it grew to 2 more, and then in '27, we'll be piloting 2 additional camps, in the state. One that'll actually be specific just to spinal cord injury survivors, as we've created a whole separate camp model just for spinal cord injury, and so the model continues to grow because the demand is there, and it truly is a symbiotic relationship of a win-win because our clients win, our caregivers win, the students win, the faculty win, and so everyone really gets a benefit out of it. And when they put together the home plan, we actually purchase a lot of adaptive equipment, or we'll pay for membership to a gym or anything like that that people need. Even sometimes we'll send, maybe a personal trainer to their home for a time period. We will pay for these things for the clients to help them enact their plan to make sure that they stay on top of it and that it's not just a 3-day throw a splash in the pan. So if you had told me in 2018 it would be at 5 different universities, it's also exciting because over the course of a year, we probably have about 420 students all told that work with the program. And now from our first camps, a lot of those are now out in hospitals and rehab facilities and now have become referral channels of making sure when people come into a hospital, present with a TBI, they know to reach out and say, hey, have you been in touch with the Head Injury Foundation? If they haven't, they'll refer them to us to make sure they don't fall through the cracks. So it even serves as a sort of pay it forward model because we now are training people how to work with this population and they remember us and send people our way downstream once they're in their careers.
That's brilliant also. So many brain injury associations, foundations across the country have issues trying to market and say this is what we have. We can offer these services, but people don't know that they exist, which was part of why I wanted to bring you on the show today because it's being very active with my Minnesota association. I see how few people are aware of these things. And my goal with having you and other representatives from different states on is to show that we do have these services and we can provide these things for brain injured populations that people might not be aware of. But I love that you already have that kind of internal thing where you kind of groomed these therapists as they went through school and the healthcare providers that as they went through school they learned about it so then they can act on that without anybody having to give them additional knowledge. That's really cool.
Well, and unfortunately, and I love what state programs do, and state programs are wonderful, but there is just when you have the ability to work for a small nonprofit, the bureaucracy sometimes of a state government gets in the way.
Yeah.
And what we used to do before we started doing this and really kind of doing in services with social workers and everything to find clients early on, there was a whole system in place with the state registry that was maintained through the Alabama Department of Public Health. So the hospitals had to report to the Department of Public Health within 90 days of someone coming in for an overnight hospital stay that they had a TBI survivor that came through. Then the Department of Public Health had to enter it into their system to generate a referral card that they sent to the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, who then would generate a letter and send it to the client before we could even contact them and offer services. And all told, we weren't even finding out about newly injured individuals until about 7 months post injury. And you've missed such a window of opportunity to work with someone and really help them figure out what they can do, what they could try, what's available to them early on in their recovery that we said we can't settle for this. And it wasn't, so we still use that system, but we use it more as a safety net to make sure that we don't miss anyone through our other referral systems, but has helped us get in touch with people so much earlier in the recovery process, which I think ultimately leads to a better outcome for them overall.
Yeah. 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 That's, I think, a great way to use that because it is such a huge time frame. And yeah, we say that the greatest improvement happens in the first like 6 to 12 months. But does that mean that's the only time of improvement? Absolutely not. You've seen that. You know that firsthand. It happens long after that 1 year mark. And that's one thing I'm always telling my patients is that for better or worse, there's no real end date to your healing. As long as we try new things, you can still get better. But it's that ability to find out about those new things. It's the ability to get connected with different resources that if you don't have that in place, it's really hard for somebody to get better. So kind of waiting that 7 month mark, that's a huge gap in there.
It really is, and I think the other piece that we always talk with people about, and I'm sure you do this as well, is the fact that insurance does what insurance is supposed to do. And so I'm not, this is not like I'm not attacking them or saying, but what insurance would define as being continued improvement and continued change and what an individual might do. So even if we have someone that attends camp and if their goal was just to learn to be able to make a meal for themselves, you probably couldn't make a case to insurance to say this is something that you should provide insurance coverage for to allow this individual to do this. But for an individual to know that they're now able to take on this ADL that they couldn't do before, and for a caregiver to now know that every day at lunch they no longer have to be responsible for that particular task for their loved one, those are wins that you really can't put a value to, but it may never make it on the chart or a government, approved insurance coverable, expense. But for our clients who get to do that, what you define as being recovery as you get further and further away from your injury and an improvement in your quality of life, it's really you again, it's just like everything else that we've talked about is unique to that individual. And so we can help them find a way to find more pride in themselves and to be more self-sufficient on their own, which is what they all want to do. Hey, I'll take it every day.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I always try to ask my patients too when they feel like they've kinda gone stagnant, they're not getting better, I'll ask them, can you identify 3 things that you can do now that you couldn't do before?" And it doesn't have to be huge things. It can just be, like, making yourself a meal. Can you plan a meal? Just little things. Can you do something now that you couldn't do before? And that kind of reignites that feeling that, "Oh, I am getting better. There is something that I can do now that I couldn't do before." So that's huge and just kind of building that hope part of it too.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. So you've kind of dealt with barriers as they come up and identify things. Do you have any other barriers that you've seen, maybe that might be unique to your area that we haven't talked about so far that you still see as things that you have goals to overcome?
Wow. I think in a lot of ways, it's probably about the fact that still, even within the nonprofit industry, as much as the internet and social media and everything else has allowed us to work better together, collaborating with other partners is still something that, because there are still things that just happen where you just want to slap yourself and say, how did I not see this 6 years ago? We had a referral that came to us last year, and it was from a news source. It was from a sort of one place type shelter for victims of domestic violence.
Mm.
And so I went and did a presentation about our organization to them. And when they were talking with me, they mentioned that they really never asked any of their clients as they came in if they had a history of a traumatic brain injury because they're dealing with so many issues at the beginning of providing safety, of making sure that they've got legal and access to law enforcement, that they're able to get back on their feet, that you're protecting anonymity, that you're dealing with physical injuries that are visible, unlike the invisible injury of a TBI. But then they also said to me that the number one cause of brain injury for the clients that they would be serving was anoxic brain injury due to strangulation. And I went and looked in our policies and procedures, and by our definition of a traumatic brain injury, not one of those individuals would have qualified for our services, which of course is absurd. So we went and changed our policies immediately and added that as a reason why that someone would qualify for our services. But it was one of those shocking moments where you're like, how? How did we go this long and miss this population? And so, in Alabama, maybe not this year because our football teams are not very good in college this year. But in most years, all of the attention in the state, and whenever you do an interview, whenever you're talking about something as part of Brain Injury Awareness Month, all of the questions are about sports related concussions and football. And as much as that is real and it is important and it is something that you know needs attention, and the big scheme of things, it probably is getting the most attention, the most money put behind it because it is the most visible in our society. That's what we pay attention to. And you're not paying attention to the studies where, and I'm sure you're probably aware of this, of the woman that donated her brain to research after living her entire life in an abusive relationship, where when they looked at the scans of it, it was so much worse in terms of the total amount of damage done to her brain than a lot of the athletes that had donated their brains that got ALS as a result of just repeated concussions and blows to the head. And you hear all this attention about one and you don't about the other. So trying to open doors to victims of sex trafficking, human trafficking, domestic abuse, it's still so hard to get everyone to collaborate and realize, hey, we can work together. We struggle in our state with finding people who maybe are not in maybe not in the country legally. and are very hesitant when they have a head injury to come and seek support. First off, for probably fear of the fact that they're going to have to show some proof of immigration status, or that just by not showing up to their job, because unfortunately they tend to be low labor positions, there's another person that jumps in and fills their job, and then they feel like I won't have work to do anymore. So, how do you address this population? It's one of those where every time that you even start to allow complacency to set in the tiniest bit and feel like, hey, we're doing a better job with our veteran population, or we've made a lot of progress with this, then you realize, oh my goodness, we're still nowhere because there's so many other areas where TBI is just sort of lurking under the surface and no one's paying attention to it. And if we're not paying attention to it, then you know that society as a whole isn't, because you and I and the people that you're talking to and that you work with, and that's our job. That's what we do. That's what we spend our time doing. And we're still missing pockets of people. And it keeps me up at night because it's so worrisome to think about someone being out there who needs help, and they haven't found us and we haven't found them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up so many good points on that. So, number one cause of concussions around the United States is falls. And you probably don't see as many of that in Alabama as we see here in Minnesota, especially with our snowy, icy winters. So that tends to be a little bit of a more of a kicker in the northern latitudes. But the sports definitely does take the number one. And kind of back to that earlier point that you made about the intimate partner violence, people don't feel like they can talk about it. And I've had a couple of patients who they weren't able to admit that it was gave them their concussion until after they were out of that relationship because they didn't feel safe in doing so. So like your mention about the patients that might be here illegally, patients of intimate partner violence, they don't feel safe reporting those things because they're going to go back to that same situation that caused them the head injury to begin with when they leave that appointment.
We've even seen it, in a weird sort of way. Wow, this is a tangent, but I hope you'll forgive me. Several years ago during COVID, and obviously it's a very difficult conversation, I'm sure, for you because of where you are and all the attention that your state is getting for reasons that you wish that it was not. But even all the way back in the George Floyd situation, we started hearing from a lot of our clients who would talk about the fact that they were having tense interactions with law enforcement because they might be walking to a local business. Their gait was unsteady. If a police officer came and was asking them some questions, they weren't making eye contact. They weren't answering correctly. They weren't always following instructions. And it is such a difficult task for law enforcement to determine, because when you start to list the signs and symptoms of someone living with TBI or someone that's under the influence of alcohol or drugs, the overlap is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so we came up with a card that we do for our clients where they can individualize it. We put it on a carabiner that they can wear on their person so they're not reaching into their pockets. And so we teach our clients how to use this and to put things on there that I may not answer your questions directly. I may need questions repeated. It may take me a second to respond, but we want them to put the things that are most important for them. But we knew that we also had to do training for law enforcement to know to look for these. When we started
Mhm.
doing training for law enforcement, the thing that blew me away there was how many police officers would come up to me afterwards and talk about TBIs that they sustained in the line of duty, but they were
Yeah.
afraid to talk about the fact that they felt like they had lasting complications for it, because as soon as you mention that you have a brain injury, all of a sudden you're put on a desk job, they take your pistol away, and you don't get to do aspects of why you took on the job in the first place. And so we saw that within our veteran population, especially those that were still active duty, that if you report that you are having some mental health related issues as a result of a brain injury, that all of a sudden your entire promotion system within the military could be altered because it becomes a part of your permanent record. And so we had to assure everyone, if you get counseling from us, it won't go to the state. It never will show up in any record. And we can kind of be that safe space to be able to do that. But you do have just a multitude of pockets where people, for various reasons, don't want to acknowledge that they have a brain injury to begin with, and it's so hard to offer help to someone if they're not at a place where they can even acknowledge that it's a real thing. And then teaching family, because there are a lot of family out there. I'm sure you hear this all the time. The number, and it's funny sometimes because you have to laugh at it sometimes, and our clients are the first ones to laugh at themselves sometimes as we talk about it through our support groups and everything. But they'll say, my wife keeps saying that I'm using my brain injury as a crutch for why I don't take out the trash every day. And I'm like, well, are you? Because there is a real possibility that you could be like, oh, that's my brain injury whenever you forget something, because it gets you off the hook sometimes. But a lot of it is educating family that this individual isn't just staying at home because it's convenient, because they don't want to return to work. I think that our TBI survivors that are within our caseload probably want to work more than probably 90% of the US population.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what's standing in the way for them to do that. But you have to teach people because they just don't believe when they look at someone, oh, they seem fine, they look fine, that there's so much going on behind the scenes that you wish people understood.
Yeah. Yeah. And that comes up time and time again. And even a couple years ago, shortly after my injury, I even had my own husband on the show to talk about just kind of how our relationship was affected. And he admitted he was very embarrassed to admit it, but he didn't understand at the beginning and he couldn't figure out why I didn't want to go back to work because he'd never seen me like that. And he didn't understand why I just wanted to be at home. And I did not. I was freaking out because I have never worked this little in my entire life from the moment I started working at 14, 15 years old. I have always had at least 20 hours a week, and I haven't had that up until recently. And it's crazy to see how little the people that live with the person that has the brain injury can understand sometimes. And you would think that they would be the ones that would understand it the best because they're there, but they're not inside the head of the person that has the injury. And you've brought up so many good points on that. It's just it's hard to get everybody to understand. And if we can't get the people that live with somebody that has a brain injury to understand, how are we going to get the rest of society to understand?
And I think, for us, it's one of the things that we continue to try to do when we have special events and other type things. We try to use art, we try to use written word, we do a survivors panel every March as a part of Brain Injury Awareness Month and invite people that don't know to come because the best way for me is to do it through the words of those that are actually living with brain injury and with their family members there with them, telling that story and describing what it's like because it does make it a little bit more real that way. And I can tell a compelling story all day long, but it's still not my story. I'm still telling someone else's story. And it's almost like stolen valor because I'm not the hero. And the hero is the person that recovered and is fighting every day to be a better version of themselves and the version that they want to be. And so I love giving opportunities for them to be able to share their story wherever we can, but it's still hard because you can only reach so many people.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I've had several survivors on my show just to share their story as well, because I think that does help a little bit. Like when you can hear directly from the person that's been experiencing it, then it becomes a little bit more of an aha moment. And yeah, this is something that we need to address. There have been a couple pretty famous actors recently that have come out. I think it was just this past week that one of the Marvel actors identified that she had a head injury. And when we see famous people having head injuries, it brings it to the light all of a sudden. And it's not just this thing that happens to sports. It happens to people outside of sports. And when we get famous people to acknowledge that they've had it, it does shed a little bit more light so that organizations like yours and others around the country can actually get some attention.
And you never wish it upon anyone, but you do appreciate when someone has it when they're open about it because it unfortunately too, it's sad and it's unfortunate, but there's a stigma sometimes where people don't want to acknowledge that because when you hear a brain injury, it happens to everyone. I mean, I thought I understood brain injury when I came to work for the Head Injury Foundation. I thought I knew a good bit about it, and I went to a support group meeting and was supposed to introduce myself. And literally I'd been talking for about 2 minutes, kind of telling people who I was. I don't know if they care, but I was telling them anyway. And all of a sudden one of the clients got up and walked and stopped literally about 6 inches from my face. And he whipped out his hand, and in his hand he had a penny and a nickel and a quarter. And he looked at me and he says, John's mother has three kids. The first is penniless, the second is Nicholas, and the third is, and he pointed to the quarter. And I said, quarterless. And he mocked me. And then he said it again. He said, John's mother has three kids. The first is penniless, the second is Nicholas. And by this time, I figured out the riddle that if it's John's mother, the third one is John. And so I answered the question, but I think I realized very quickly what he was demonstrating to me because without even realizing it, I had almost subconsciously been talking loudly and slowly because I had
Mhm.
convinced myself that I was talking to a group of TBI survivors and they needed me to tone it down because I was the one without a TBI and I wanted to make sure everyone understood me. And
Mm.
he came up to me and in a matter of 30 seconds showed me his brain was working about 80 times better than mine was. And he didn't need me to go down to him. He needed me to treat him like an equal because that's exactly what he was. And it's a life lesson I've never forgotten. But I think a lot of people, when you hear brain injury, you assume that means that someone is moving at a slower speed and you need to make it easier for them to comprehend. And it's so insulting that people avoid even admitting that they have it. And so I love it when someone will step up and say, I have a brain injury. And then show what they can still do because
Yeah.
so many times it's more than what I could ever dream doing, without a brain injury. And that's why I love our population. I love what they do, and they inspire me every day.
Yeah. I like that connection and the disconnect with patients as well, because I'll describe my situation because they'll be going on things, and I'll say, well, first off, I said, I don't know if you've looked at my background at all. On my bio on our clinic website, it tells that I've had a brain injury myself, and I'll say, so many of the things that you describe, I will understand because I've had those, but I've not had all of those symptoms. Because I'll have some people, they'll bring up something and they're like, well, did you experience that too? And I still say no, but not everybody experiences the same things. And I'm willing to look it up because I know it can happen. And I've had some patients come in and just bizarre symptoms. They're like, well, can that be related to my brain injury? And I'm like, well, your brain touches everything in your body. So, yes. And if you didn't have it before the injury and you do have it now, yes. Did I experience it? No, because not everybody is the same. And that's the joy and the frustration in dealing with brain injury all at the same time.
It truly is. I think one of the funniest moments I probably have ever had was about 2 years in where a wife came to me and she said, "Scott, after my husband's brain injury, all he wants to do is smoke and cuss all the time." And I was like, "Well, what was your husband like before his brain injury?" "Well, he smoked and cussed all the time." And I was like, "Well," I said, "unfortunately, the brain injury is also not a magic pill that takes away some negative behaviors that someone has before." So it is sort of one of those situations that you do have to look at it and realize it can affect you in any number of ways. And you won't even always understand every way that it can, but being sensitive to that and just understanding for the most part that everyone's trying their best to figure it out, but we don't understand it all. And if we don't understand it all, it's almost impossible to compensate for every way that a brain injury affects someone.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
enjoy trying every day, as I know you do.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, kind of thinking forward a little bit, where would you like to see the future of head injury supports going?
I think like every social service agency, I wish we could find a way to work ourselves into non-existence. But the reality is that it's not happening. And all the data continues to show that the number of brain injuries every year increases. Some of that I think is because there probably are more. I hope that some of it is because we're doing a better job of correctly identifying those that are out there, which I think is you're seeing an increase for both reasons. But I would love to see some of the stigma removed from it, where behavior type issues, we still hear from people that talk about that they stopped going to church after their brain injury because, their loved one would sort of maybe unfiltered would holler out or would say something, or maybe would even, drop words that you wouldn't typically hear in church. And we're so understanding about that. We've made so much progress with autism and our understanding of autism as a whole and everything that goes along with it in terms of some of the behaviors that you see from people living with autism. I would love to see more acceptance when it comes to brain injury to understand that. I would love to see ways of really not just the bare minimum in terms of adaptations that happen with employment or volunteer opportunities, but really trying to find ways to make the necessary accommodations to allow people to return to work at whatever that would look like, because there is such a drive and such a desire to contribute and to be a contributing member of society that just seems to be held back for so many of our TBI survivors that just leaves them sitting at home wishing they could do more than what they're able to do. And trying to find a way to get through some of those stigmas to open more doors for sort of a reintegration into society, because you continue to hear about it. I mean, and it's been this case with and I'm sure you've seen it too, that the number one complaint has been social isolation, and it hasn't changed for 30 plus years. And you can provide every support group, every camp, every whatever known to man, but it's not the same as feeling comfortable going back out into society. And the staring, the worrying that people are going to look at them as being different. I would love to find some way of getting beyond that, because it's robbing them of joy that they want to have in life. And we do. We put together a lot of programs, and I'm sure everyone that you talk to will say that, but most of our programs are targeting them being with other groups of people who are all living with brain injury. And I would love to find ways of targeting programs where you're getting them connected and doing things and interacting and spending time with people who aren't living with brain injury, so that people can look at it and say, well, I can't tell which person has a brain injury and which person doesn't. Exactly. That's what we've been trying to tell you for the last X hundred years, is that you really probably can't. And that's the way it should be. So quit focusing on it as being something where you should be watching for it. And I don't know how to do that, but I guess that would be my hope, that we could find a way to make progress in that arena.
Yeah, yeah. I have heard of some places where they try to get individuals with brain injury into the general population to work alongside of other people. in different capacities for different jobs, whatever they can tolerate, but it gets them intermingling with regular non-brain injured individuals at the same time. And when we can do that kind of thing, I think it's great. It can give people a sense of purpose when they have that brain injury, that they're actually doing something, but then they're being advocates for the brain injury population, for the people around them as well. It's a job that people don't want as a brain injury survivor, but you are by definition an advocate. So that is on you to help other people understand what you're going through, because it is not something that we see unless you have a fracture at the time of your injury. People don't see that you're injured. And maybe if you open your mouth and speak, if they knew you before your injury, they might notice some differences. But if for most of my patients, when they come in, people that they know now didn't know them before their injury, so they have no idea, they have no comparison, and they just look like normal people. And so what is normal? There really is nothing. So when
Right.
I always ask my patients, "Well, is this normal for you?" I never ask, is this normal? Is it normal for you? Because everybody has their own norm. But I do think that if we can make that little integration, I think that would be helpful as well. Yeah, there's so many things that could happen in the future. Are we all going to get our wishes come true? Probably not, but it's still kind of fun to say, well, what would I like to see in the future?
It is, almost makes a little noise like about a dream sequence, but it's fun to dream and think about what could be. So I like that. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we have a couple social medias that you sent over to me. Where can people find the Alabama Head Injury Foundation if they want to find what your guys are up to?
First place to start would probably be at our website, www.ahif.org. And then contact information is there, phone number is there, email is there. You can also go through Facebook, Alabama Head Injury Foundation, or, Al Head Injury for Instagram. I'm older, so I do spend time on those a little bit, but not an awful lot. But I do have some younger staff that keep those up and running for us. But yes, absolutely to reach out that way. We do have online Zoom support groups that we started during COVID that have become a primary service delivery method for us. And we do have people that live outside the state that attend. So if there are people that don't have an active community that they can kind of plug into, live in a rural area and don't have access to being able to go somewhere in person, we are really open to treat everyone as family, and people can attend, because the utility cost of adding one more person to a Zoom meeting is truly zero. So we would love to have people. So we've had people from Hawaii, from Pennsylvania, from Washington State, from Oregon. We've had people from all over join our Zoom support groups, because we welcome everyone. So if anyone is ever interested, they're very recreational and socialization heavy, but that's what people want, and so people are always happy to join us that way. But yeah, if anyone has questions or would like to know more, we'd be happy to hear from you and help you out however we could.
Awesome. Awesome. And I will include those links in the show notes so people can find that easily and they don't have to write anything down while they're driving. Thank you so much for being here today, Scott. As we wrap up, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I would just honestly, I'd just like to say thank you, because people who commit their time to spreading awareness and making more people aware of it, even if it's one person at a time, it makes a difference. And you may never know the number of people who watched your podcast and found comfort in realizing, wow, I'm not alone. There are other people that are like this. There's hope for me, or found resources. So I appreciate you taking time to do this, because I do believe it makes a difference.
Awesome. Awesome. And thank you for your work. Without your support there in your state, I think patients would be very lost. So great job for you and your organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it so that others can benefit. Please also consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to catch the latest info and get links on all of the social medias there. See you next time.